In this session, we shall see how to do the best way the soldering. This is a soldering iron. This is usually kept on a stand so that you don't damage other places, and these are called pencil soldering iron. They are usually of 25 to 30 watt soldering iron, and the temperature is very much suitable for doing electronics and small electrical wire soldering work. There are also soldering irons which are of higher wattage, but they are not advisable to use for electronics work. Put it always on the stand. Now let's look at the solder that we have to use. The solder is usually of 60% tin and 40% lead. Some people call it as lead only, but actually it is a combination of 60:40. And they are available in different shapes and size, and usually about 200 grams or even 50 grams also. But then if you get a 200 grams, take a small spool out of that and then wrap it comfortably so that it can be used at your convenience by putting it like this. So that's the preliminary action that one has to take for using the solder. Next is the soldering iron tip. You see, the soldering iron tip is very important to be maintained in a tip-top condition. What is tip-top condition? The tip-top condition is because if the soldering iron is left for a longer time, it gets oxidized, and then the oxidization makes it so bad that if you start reusing it at any time, it becomes very difficult for doing the soldering. So before you start the soldering, what you have to do is you have to apply some little solder on the soldering iron and make it in tip-top condition like this. You see, the smokes are coming because there is flux inside the solder, and that is how these smokes are coming. Though it's not very harmful, but these smokes will be there. Whatever excess solder, you must throw it so that it is ready for it is perfectly tipped, it perfectly tinned, and it is ready for soldering. Now let's take a wire. How do we do a soldering of a wire? Now supposing it's a stranded wire, there is a lot of strands on that wire. What you do is that you twist them together for both the ends, right? Now what you do is you twist them, join them together. Suppose you want to make a loop like this, and we do it this way. So this makes a form mechanical contact before we proceed for the electrical way of soldering. So that is the process when you do the wire, and this looks like this before soldering. Some people do it this way, take both the ends, twist it like this, and this doesn't make a very good, or doesn't look like good also. Now once you have done it, and if you happen to have a jack with you, a jack like this which can hold the component or the wire or anything that you are going to solder, you put it on the jack this way, and it becomes easy for you because you will be using both your hands for this soldering. Now the next process of soldering is that the component or the item which is going to be soldered is got to be heated. So before heating, so your tip, you must ensure that the tip is in perfect condition. You see, now he is trying to heat it. He is not applied the solder yet. Just look at it. He is not applying the solder. He is just trying to heat, and this heating expands the copper or the metal which is there, and then when you apply the solder like this, what happens that the solder melts through and then covers it a very perfect way and gives a very shining look. This is the best method of soldering. There are many people, those who do not follow this method, they follow certain wrong method, and that is a very bad way of doing soldering before heating. Like for example, he takes a solder like this and then it goes together with the solder and the soldering iron. You see, it is not trying to take the solder at all because it was not preheated. So the heating is a must. Now after some time only it has started taking the solder. So this is a very simple process, but then you should never follow this practice. This practice is not a good practice. You should heat it first, but then take care that the heating should not be for a long time. If it is a active component, these are passive components like wires and all these things, they will not have any difficulty in soldering process. But if you go for active components, you have to. Now let's see how the procedure is adopted for PCB soldering and how to solder. See, it so happens that what is flux? What tips should be used? Do solder fumes contain dangerous amounts of lead? Why regularly clean and tin the iron tip? All these are necessary. You see, here is the situation where somebody is trying to do the soldering in a very wrong way. What he is doing is taking some solder and trying to put it just like gumming something or pasting something. This is a very bad practice, and this never gives a good soldering. And in fact, after some days, the soldering may come out. Or another situation where the component which is having some dirts and it was not properly cleaned, and is trying to put the solder, making all efforts to solder it, but the soldering is not getting perfected there. Unfortunately, we have little knowledge about how the copper oxidizes under the heat. It is about 4 times. And see, if when it oxidizes, and then the oxidized copper never catches a solder, because it has got flux inside the solder. Now let's see how the solder behaves on the soldering iron. She is trying to put some solder on the soldering iron, and you see how it boils, because the flux is the only thing which takes the smokes out. Solder stops smoking because the flux has boiled off. After all the flux has boiled off, the solder is only visible on the soldering iron. It looks like this. Now if you have an access to a jack, how to solder a PCB? Take the component, bend it properly, and then insert it, and then try to bend it on the other side, and then some people cut it before soldering if it is easy, and then some people cut it after soldering. But then if you cut it before soldering also, doesn't matter. But then if there is an oxidization you find in the PCB, you must clean it by sandpaper before soldering, because and then you must clean the tip of the soldering iron either by this or by a metal sponge which is used by ladies in the kitchen, can also be used for this purpose, so that the tip is always in clean condition. Severe oxidization, solder won't melt on tip. See, because if it is kept in a long time under heating, you see now it is not catching the solder. So the cleaning is a very, very important subject of the soldering iron. You see, now after cleaning, it catches the solder very comfortably. So now let's see how you solder. Now you take the component and heat the component, both the component and the track, in such a way that both the components are heated properly, and then apply the solder from the opposite side. When you apply the solder from the opposite side, it makes a very firm and good soldering. That's a good practice of doing a good soldering. You see how it is happening. It is happening in a very perfect way. It gives a very shining look, and that would make a permanent connection in future time. And for PCBs of this nature, if you would like to solder, make sure that you go on supplying solder sufficiently in such a way that it perfectly solders. You should not apply more than 2 to 3 seconds of the solder. Now let's see how you quickly do a soldering. Though he is applying the solder and soldering and almost at a time, but then there is still a time difference. Sometimes the components which needs to be soldered can be clamped with something so that the heat is transferred to this thing. If you excessively heat sometimes the solder with a soldering iron, the track gets uprooted. You have to clean the solder after it is perfectly done, so that the board looks neat and clean. Thank you.